Welcome to SCM Live. I'm Keith Martin, the publisher of Sports Car Market Magazine, and I'm your host today. Take a moment and like this and subscribe to this channel, and you'll be notified every time a new SCM Live episode appears. This is a spotlight edition where we pick one member of the sports car market family and learn a little bit more about them. Today's guest is Mark Hyman of Hyman Limited. Mark has been buying and selling cars for over 31 years. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Keith. Thank you.
You ready to tell us your story?
I'm always ready to tell you a story.
So, Mark, you have a master's degree in international finance. How did you end up buying and selling cars?
Well, when I was a little kid, Keith, I was obsessed by vintage cars. I was obsessed by anything, actually, with wheels and an engine. And so it was always my obsession and my hobby from the time I was a little kid to play with cars. And I know that's kind of a coined phrase, but it's really true. My father and my grandfather and my uncle were in the tire business when I was growing up. So I was always around automobiles and mechanics and things like that. And so I had access to people that like to wrench. So I enjoyed doing it. I learned a lot about it. When I was about 7 years old, this car that you see above us on the rack, my father had it restored, and it's a 1920 Hudson Doctor's Coupe. So when I was about 7 years old, that car came out of a restoration shop, and I became obsessed with it. I became kind of one with this car, and I actually kind of had a fantasy that one day when I'd retire from whatever I was going to do, that I would collect cars. So this car, while it's not the most spectacular vintage automobile on the planet, it is the most spectacular vintage automobile on the planet to me, because it really is the beginning of Hyman Limited classic cars.
What happened next, Mark? So here you are, you have this car which inspired you to get started at spending time around cars. What was the next step for you?
Well, this car didn't inspire me to become a vintage car dealer. But this car inspired me to become active in the hobby. This car inspired me to learn about vintage cars. And this car inspired me from the time I was a little kid to just be involved. You know, I used to read Hemmings and I would read Old Cars Weekly. And I was very, very involved even as a little kid with learning. As you know, as years went on, in my teens, I started restoring a couple of cars. In my 20s, in the 20s, I was actually in the real estate business doing development and brokerage. And in my 20s, I was always wrenching on things, but I always had a car or two that I was buying or selling. In the late 80s, I was working on a master's in international finance, but I was also tinkering with cars while I was working on my master's. Which leads us to the second part of the story and kind of how I got involved in the vintage car industry as a business. And this was 1989. And I found in a not so desirable part of St. Louis, a 1960 Fossil Vega. And ended up buying that car and selling it and making a lot of money. And so that kind of leads us to the second car that I want to share with you. So this is obviously not the car, but this is an example of a Fossil Vega. The Fossil Vega that I found in the late 80s was a Fossil 2, which is a slightly different body style, and is the last model of Fossil Vega that they built with a V8. And they're extraordinary. But I didn't know much about a Fossil Vega. I'd heard about it. I knew it existed. I had to go on the wild goose chase to find it. When I did find it, it was a car that was bought by a guy here in St. Louis in the 60s, and he parked it. He didn't know where it was, and I had to find it. I did find it, and when I found it, it was a project car, which I bought and made a lot of money. And I said, you know what? This is fun. And so not only was it fun to find a car and drag it out of a barn, but it was fun to make some money. The most important part of it was that the buyer for this car was overseas. And if you recall, I was working on a master's in international finance. I was fascinated and interested in international business, and to have put all three of my interests together, business, cars, and international finance all in one thing kind of sparked an idea. And not only was it fun, but the idea worked. And obviously 30 years later, as you know, we have become pretty well known for trading cars all over the world.
So Mark, I want to back up for a second. You say you bought this car, you restored it, and you sold it for you made a lot of money on it. How did you know how much to ask for the car? How did you find a buyer?
Well, I didn't restore the car. I bought the car, I drug it out of a garage, I brought it to a friend of mine's shop and let it sit there. I did not restore it. It's no different than what we do now when we need to figure out what something is worth. We call the right people and we say, look, I found such and such car. What is this thing worth? And people were telling me a number that was multiples of what I had paid. And I just figured out what it was worth and figured out how to sell it. Interestingly enough, that I did sell it overseas to a dealer who became a very dear friend of mine. And it opened up the window to send him lots and lots and lots of cars. And Keith, as you well know, in the 90s, we were running around the country buying up every single unrestored European car we could and shipping them over to Europe. So after I sold him this first car, he said, hey, Mark, this car is way better than you said it was. I'm not sure it really was, but he got me engaged. And he gave me a list of things to chase. And so I spent the next several years chasing these cars, and from one car was 10 cars to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 to 60, and we ended up exporting a lot of cars back in those days.
Mark, something people don't always understand about the late 80s and 90s and that boom is that most of these cars were built right after World War II. And Europe was in terrible financial condition, and nearly all of these cars were exported to the US. So the Jaguars and Triumphs and Alphas and Maseratis, they didn't stay in Europe. They all came over here. Suddenly in the late 80s, 90s, Europe begins to have an economic resurgence, and they want their cars back.
Well, and that's exactly right. So you and I both spent the early years of our career running around the United States, dragging what was once somebody's leftover parts car out of their garage, or was their hobby car or their transportation. And there was thousands of these cars scattered about garages and barns all over the United States. So guys like you and I, our job, and it was fun, our job was to run around the country buying them up and loading 6 of them at a time into containers and sending them back to Europe, where people were buying them and restoring them, and then of course reselling them.
So this Fossil Vega really represents the beginning of your development as a dealer.
The Fossil Vega is the first car that I bought and resold. So the Fossil Vega was, and will always be near and dear to my heart. This particular Fossil is one that I've had for some time. I love it. It drives exquisitely, and I frankly don't have any interest in selling it. I love the car.
So tell us how things unfolded then over the next 30 years.
Well, we went from buying and exporting unrestored cars to buying things that ran and drove, which was really exciting. I remember calling a buddy of mine one day and saying, oh my God, Scott, I bought an Austin Lee 3000 and actually runs and drives, and I drove it to his house. And Keith, it was the rustiest, worst, most horrible thing you'd ever seen. But it was exciting that it actually ran and drove. That was like a monumental step towards having a nice thing. But seriously, over the years, the types of cars expanded, the quality of the cars got better, and frankly, now we don't deal in projects unless they're extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily valuable. Our company has grown into a company who deals in the best of the best of the best. And we're not looking for bargains when we chase cars. We're looking for extraordinary quality and provenance. And I don't know if you've been able to see some of the things that are in the showroom through this interview, but we're really, really proud of the quality and the diversity of what we offer. One of the things that happened to me, I want to say, well, about 17, 18 years ago, was I started getting into French cars. And I'm going to show you a car that I think changed my life. And that car is the 1937 Delahaye Fagoni and Falaschi short wheelbase cabriolet. This car won Best of Show in Pebble Beach in 2000. In 2003, I was able to acquire the car for a client, and the car's been with us ever since. So I've had the car, driven it, I've played with it, I've shown it all over the United States. But this car started me and the company into the world of Concours automobiles. So we've put together a number of collections of pre-war French cars. If you look around, there's Delahayes, there's Talbots, there's Peugeot Darmats. There's a lot of really, really wonderful automobiles with custom coach work that are not only in the showroom today, but hundreds and hundreds of these cars have gone through our hands over the last several years. So,
Mark, you've been an advertiser in the sports car market for a long time, which we really appreciate. And I have watched the quality of the cars in your ads go up over the years. And in the past few years, I've noticed that you've had cars for sale that won Best of Show at Pebble Beach. Now tell me, who is the buyer for a car that's already won the highest award you can win in the collector car world?
The buyer for a car like that is somebody who's really not that interested in the concours scene, and he really doesn't need the pat on the back of somebody saying to him, boy, your car is really fabulous. The buyer of a car that's already won Pebble is a guy who really just wants to buy the best of the best. He's not interested in somebody handing him a trophy to tell him it's the best of the best. He knows it's the best of the best, and he wants to buy a car with provenance for himself.
Mark, does the fact that a car won Best of Show at Pebble add an appreciable amount to its value?
I'm going to say yes, it adds value, because there is no higher accolade for an automobile than winning Best of Show at Pebble Beach. But having said that, there are certain guys that won't buy the car if it's already won Pebble because they want to buy a car to take to Pebble. So while you may take a few people out of that market, that pool, yes, it adds value. How much? I don't know. I can't tell you. I think it's an arbitrary number. But if you have a car that's won Best of Show at Pebble, you have a car that the world cannot dispute. It's one of the best cars in the world.
So Mark, you've taken us on quite a trip today, from the Doctor's Coupe to the Fossil Vega, now to the Delahaye. What's next for Hyman Limited?
I think Hyman Limited is working on continuing to be who we are. We love who we are, we love what we do, but we're also doing things to become more relevant to today's world. So as you know, I do a lot of pre-war cars, but we also do a lot of post-war cars, and we're doing a lot of what we call the new timer cars or young timer cars, like the newer Mercedes and the BMWs and even Toyotas and Datsuns. So we do a lot of that. What's next is for us to bring in some young people who can help us keep relevant to what's happening in today's marketplace. I'm 60 years old. I still like do things the way I did them before, but the company itself is morphing. The company itself is getting younger as I get older, and that's a very exciting thing.
So Mark, let's say the young Mark Hyman walks into your showroom and tells you he's just found this Fossil Vega in a garage and he'd like to sell it and make some money and maybe even go into the car business. What advice would you give him? Work
your ass off and you'll do it. It works. Seriously, it's a great business. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity. There's no one way to do it. It's for a car nut and an entrepreneur, there's no better lifestyle and there's no better life. It's been a gift. It's been a fabulous thing.
Mark, thank you for spending time with us today. And also thank you for the way that you have helped the car hobby evolve through your own passion and through your own development, from the Doctor's Coupe all the way out to the Delahaye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith.